Thank you, Madam President. I rise this afternoon to talk about what some observers have called one of the best historically black colleges and universities in our country, and I would agree with that. It's Delaware State University in Dover, Delaware, home of the Hornets. For a number of years, I was a naval flight officer, and the Vietnam War, came back to the U.S. and moved to Delaware, got an MBA at the University of Delaware, and right away after that, I went to work in what became the Delaware Economic Development Office, and we were headquartered, believe it or not, at the campus of Delaware State College. Delaware State College, an HBCU, not a well-funded college, not one that had the favor, frankly, of the governor, the legislature, for the most part, and was a bit of a stepchild. And I used to think, boy, wouldn't it be great to be able to help transform Delaware State College into something historic, memorable, outstanding. And later on, I'd be elected governor, about 15 years later, and have a chance to work with a fellow who was the president of Delaware State University at the time, and to transform with the help of the General Assembly, Delaware State College and Delaware State University. Today, out of all the HBCUs in the country, it is, I think, latest ranking of the public college HBCUs, I think it's number 5. And I think there's about 70 or 75 of them in all. And they've just reported that their enrollment for the coming year will reach 5,000 students, all in undergraduate, graduates, master's, PhD programs, which is easily a record. And we're enormously proud of the Hornets and the great job that they're doing educating people. Last month, on one of my frequent visits to Delaware State, I took a campus tour, it's unlike any other, and from the cockpit of a brand new Vulcan Air 1.0 single-engine aircraft, and we flew all over Kent County and north of Dover. Had a chance to do some approaches, and it was a lot of fun, and it was basically a reminder that Delaware State provides undergraduate and graduate degree programs for all kinds of training and educational needs. But one of the key ones right now, and one of the most interesting, at least as former naval flight officer, is that Delaware State is I think the largest producer of pilots and aviation professionals of color in the country. I believe they have over 100 students in their program. Every one of them, when they graduate, has a job waiting for them. Some of them are pilots, others do a variety of work that's related to aviation. But we have today about 156, 157 million people go to work in this country. There's about 5 million jobs where nobody will show up. And one of those areas that we need people is frankly, in aviation, the aviation world. And Delaware State is providing those. When our plane landed earlier this year at the airport just north of Dover, I held a roundtable with Delaware State University's Executive Vice President and Provost, Dr. Tony Allen. We talked with administrators, we talked with students about a bipartisan bill called the Future Act that's been discussed on the floor today and in previous days. The Future Act, as you'll recall, was introduced by Senator Jones of Alabama, Senator Scott from South Carolina, and it would provide a little over $250 million annually to minority-serving institutions of higher education, including about $85 million to HBCUs for an additional 2 years through fiscal year 2021. Almost $900,000 for those monies would go directly to Delaware State University. And you might ask, what does Delaware State do with that money? And they use this federal funding to help support STEM and teacher education programs at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and ensure that students at Del State have access to the best research tools. Specifically, this funding is used to help modernize classrooms at Delaware State University, to improve math instruction, to help recruit young men of color to teach in K-12 classrooms so that all students have mentors that they can look up to. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, only about 2% of teachers in the American public school system are African American men. About probably in excess 20% or more of the students are African American males. And think about that. That's And a lot of those African-American males, frankly, haven't had some of the best mentors and role models in their lives growing up. And we have so few teachers of color that are minority male. The Future Act funding is, I think, a good step for Congress to take to help bridge that gap. I think it's a good example of how the federal government supports this critical mission at Delaware State and at HBCUs across the country. Back in early September, the House of Representatives did its job and voted to reauthorize this funding through the Bipartisan Future Act. And unfortunately, the Senate has not followed the lead of the House in this critical federal funding for our nation's HBCUs lapsed on September 30th. And before I yield to Senator Coons, I just want to say my recollection, I might have this wrong, I'm looking for my staff to be sitting right here and telling me the right numbers, but again, 2% of the teachers that are in our public schools in America, and I think in Delaware, are men of color. They're African American. Almost 20%, maybe 25% of the students in our public school system are people of color, and about half of those are male. And we need to do a better job. I, fellow as governor, started a mentoring program in our state. We recruited, when I was governor, 10,000 mentors, and a lot of them to work with children of color. A lot of them have grown up in homes where they didn't have a positive male role model in their life, and that's why the mentoring program is so important, and that's why we especially need minority male teachers who are African American. And that's not all we need, but that's a big part of what we need. And I think over half of the minority male teachers that we have in Delaware in our schools were educated at Delaware State University, over half. And we need more of those. I think Senator Coons has joined me on the floor. I'm enormously proud of Delaware State University and the leadership that they have today and in the past. Proud to have been an honorary Hornet, and proud to yield to my colleague, Senator Coons, who's been right there fighting for Delaware State from the start.
Senator from Delaware.
Thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank my colleague from our home state of Delaware. I come to the floor to join a number of my colleagues in speaking on a pressing issue, a critical lapse in funding for hundreds of colleges and universities across our nation. On September 30th, $255 million in annual federal funding for historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions expired. Since this fund was first created, it has supported 400 HBCUs and MSIs, historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions across our country, including 97 HBCUs last year. This lapse has created real uncertainty and harm to these organizations, these universities, their students, their employees, and the public. And I just wanted to join my colleagues in highlighting the importance of this funding. I want to speak specifically to the HBCU of which Delaware is so proud, Delaware State University. Delaware State is an engine for educational equity and access, for innovation and for leadership in our state, our region, and our nation. Delaware State University is one of the country's top public HBCUs. Its graduates go on to successful careers in all sorts of industries. Graduates from Del State have become some of our state's best nurses and teachers, business leaders, social workers, and Senate staff. DSU's research programs are important drivers for innovation in a state with a proud history of invention and innovation. It's home to the Delaware Center for Neuroscience Research, a partnership of institutions across our state working to advance our understanding of how our brains form thoughts and memories and feelings and how they change over time as we age. It's also home to OSCAR, the Optical Science Center for Applied Research, where research that is in part federally funded is helping speed early detection of disease, support our soldiers in better deterring and detecting threats, and equipping NASA missions, including the Mars rover, with improved sensors. To put it simply, Madam President, we are very proud of Del State, and there's a lot of which to be proud. DSU grads are so impressive, I've asked several of them to join my staff here in Washington. Their commitment to equity and excellence is why we can't allow HBCUs around the country, such as Del State, to lose out on vitally needed federal funding. Last year, this program provided nearly $1 million, $887,000 to Delaware State, which was about 20% of their Title III funding. These funds have a direct impact on students and funds critical science, math, and educator preparation programs. Madam President, there's no good reason for the Senate to ignore our HBCUs and MSIs and deny them the funding they deserve. In September, the House passed a bipartisan, budget-neutral, 2-year extension of this critical funding that is known as the Future Act. And while I share Senator Alexander's commitment to permanently extending this funding, we must not ask institutions to put their budgeting and planning on hold while we here in the Senate negotiate over many other pressing issues in higher education. So, Madam President, I urge my colleagues to pass the Future Act immediately, and with that, I'd like to make a motion. Madam President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 212, H.R. 2486, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.